Alright, welcome back ladies and gentlemen. This is Luke from Guild Action Team Broforce. In this video we're going to touch base on the DPS Warrior. We're going to talk about stat priorities, runes, rune sets, builds, of course, and the amp to go. The amps I suggest to go with the build. And as always, I will be having annotations at the bottom of this video for you YouTube users. So you can just get to the meat and potatoes. If you want to get to the build, so be it. Click on it. You don't have to listen to the whole video. Alright, so first and foremost, we're going to talk about stat priorities. We're going to talk about primaries first. The first primary would be brutality because it gives you assault power, which increases your damage. And it will always increase your damage better than any other stat. So, good to know. Next primary stat would be Moxie because it gives you crit hit rating, critical severity rating as well. Also good stats to have. Next would be Finesse. Finesse increases your strike through rating, basically meaning that your abilities have a less chance to deflect. Deflects are always bad for your DPS. So. And it also gives you critical severity rating as well. Lastly would be Grit, because, well, a dead DPS does no damage, which is always bad. So that's also in our primaries as well. Secondary stats. Secondary stats would be Assault Power. Getting your strike through up to a point where you don't deflect as much. I'd say maybe about 7, 8. Actually, about 8% would be perfect with your amps as well. So, next would be crit hit chance, then crit hit severity, and lastly max health. So that basically covers the stat priorities real quick. We'll talk about runes. Some of the rune sets that you want to look for. Obviously, these things are pretty expensive, so, maybe if you're a new veteran dungeon runner, you may not want to spend a lot of money on weapon specialists. However, it is a pretty good rune set for the warriors, DPS warriors. A lot of people will go assassin because it increases your assault power and does a debuff, I believe, physical debuff on the target as well. So it's also not a bad rune set to go with as well. It's also a lot more cheaper to buy those runes and slot them. And I believe you have more options with the assassin set as well, whereas you're kind of limited on the amount of different slots for weapons specialists, if that makes sense. I think that pretty much covers it. As always, one thing you want to realize is that with runes is that, if your first rune is like a fusion rune, you don't want to put like brutality. You'd rather put secondary stats like assault power always on the fusion slot first before anything else. Because, like I stated in my stat priorities, it'll always scale your damage better. And that's always good. I think that basically covers what I wanted to talk about with stat priorities and rune sets. Let's dive into the abilities. Alright, so Relentless Strikes is our first ability. Before I go there, let me talk about the stance you should be in. I know it's a blinding flash of the obvious, but you should be in Onslaught stance, which increases your damage by 35% when you activate it. Resets your cooldowns on your abilities. Things like Rampage or Savage Strikes, stuff like that. It also, one other note, you have something resource warriors have is kinetic energy. So say you build your kinetic energy up to say 750, pop your innate, and it stays there for the remainder of the buff that you receive from Onslaught. Um, and so that's just some FYI stuff. And we'll talk a little more about it when we talk about somewhat of a priority system and uh, what you kind of look for with the warrior. It's really not that complicated, honestly. Um, and that's why for a long time DPS warriors were pretty OP. Not taking any punches there, guy. Not throwing any. Sorry. Uh, anyway, moving on. Relentless strikes. First thing you need to know is that as a DPS warrior, you're melee. So a lot of your telegraphs are somewhat small and conal. So you have the ability to cleave a lot of times, multiple enemies. Um, and this is no different from any other ability. As far as the telegraph goes, it's a small cone. Um, and it deals damage. It's not 5 foes. I think it's 3 or 2 now. WSBS is off on that. They recently changed that actually. So, and it builds 180 kinetic energy per use. The tier 4, 20% chance to gain efficiency for 5 seconds, which is it reduces kinetic energy delay by 3.4% for 5 seconds, stacks 3 times. The tier 8 for it has a 20% chance to reset the cooldown of Rampage, Whirlwind, and Tremor. Again, it's pretty nice, as our next ability we're going to talk about is Rampage. Now, Rampage, okay, again, same size telegraph. It's a multi-tap ability. You have to hit it 4 times total. 1 to activate it, and 3 more times after the first one to go ahead and incur the cooldown of it. But basically, it hits up to 3 foes. Pretty strong ability for DPS warriors. It does a lot of damage for you. Alright, so the tier 4 deals an additional % damage while above 500 kinetic energy, an additional more percentage damage while above 750 kinetic energy. So this is kind of where you're starting to see where warriors have a ramping up process where they have to build their kinetic energy to a certain point before they use other abilities to maximize their DPS. So again, FYI. The tier 8 we take, it applies an Empower for 6 seconds, which increases your assault power by 2% of your current maximum. Can stack up to 4 times, so 8% increase to your assault power. Yes, please. As assault power will always increase our damage more than any other stat. Always keep that in mind. Next ability is Savage Strikes. Deals a % damage and a base physical damage twice to 5 foes. Builds 125 kinetic energy with each strike. There's a knockdown bonus, just FYI, that when they're knocked down, enemies are knocked down, you deal more damage. Okay. We don't tier it up because other abilities are much stronger. This is sort of a filler, really and truly. So not much to talk about there. All right, Bridging Strikes. This is an on proc ability, so when you critical hit, it'll become available to you. And it's a pretty strong ability. Usually what a lot of people like to do is try to hit Breaching Strikes and Savage Strikes at the same time. So the animations kind of go off at the same time, if that makes sense, and you don't incur a global cooldown, and therefore you kind of increase your damage. Okay, that's in a perfect world. It doesn't always work that way, but in a perfect world, you'd like to do Breaching Strikes and Savage Strikes at the same time. Okay. That basically covers what we were wanting to talk about with this assault abilities. We're going to talk about support real quick. We just threw Bum Rush on our bar as a sort of a utility spell, um, because it lets you reposition, maybe get into an area where telegraphs aren't hitting you, get back to an enemy so you can do damage quicker. So good ability all around. All right. Now a couple of these you can switch around. I really wouldn't too much. Probably the only ability that you'd ever really switch out is, say, like a lot of times in veteran dungeons, DPS need to have about 3 interrupts, right? So if you have to switch out to that kind of build, my first thing I'm going to take off my bar is Bum Rush, and I'm going to substitute Flashbang. Okay. Now, one thing to note about Flashbang is this: Flashbang does not, it doesn't actually work properly unless you use Flashbang first, and then either kick or grapple last, um, next and last. So you never want to basically use Flashbang last when you're trying to interrupt, okay? Because it doesn't always go off, and it's sort of interesting that it doesn't. But it that's just something my friend Boo was sharing with me when I was kind of going over a lot of this stuff with him. So again, FYI, uh, an ability that you absolutely never want to take off your bar if you can help it is Power Link, because it's an increase for you as well as your party. So you almost always will run. There's no reason why you wouldn't run Power Link. I was about to say that you almost always. No, you never want to take Power Link off your bar ever. That goes for Savage, Relentless Strikes, Rampage, and Breaching Strikes. You can always substitute Savage Strikes for something else. Say, for example, Ripsaw isn't bad. Smackdown is also not bad. So just giving you options. You don't have to. One thing I like about the DPS Warrior is there's not so much a cookie cutter like there was with the Esper. And so you're allowed a little leeway to, interchange abilities based off of what you feel is your playstyle, and what you feel will do better damage, with that playstyle. Alright, kind of got off track, but basically kick is an interrupt. It destroys interrupt armor. Same kind of telegraph as a lot of your other attacks. So you need to be in melee range to use it. Grapple gives you a little bit more range. It's a line telegraph on the ground, but it also destroys interrupt armor. And lastly, Power Link. Like I was saying, you never want to take this off your bar. Power Link Tier 4 increases damage dealt by you and party members within 6 meters by an additional 2.5%. So it's a very good buff to have. And, I would say this, go as far as to say this, that if, say for example, some of your abilities are all, you're waiting on Power Link to come back up, right? And you're using just your basic attack, Relentless Strikes, say for example. And Power Link comes up, you always want to pop that first. Always. It's just too big of a deal. And I would also throw this in there too, in that statement, is that if Rampage is also on cooldown, then Power Link is your next best DPS increase. And it's right there with Breaching Strikes as well. But because Breaching Strikes is a proc ability, it's not going to always be up for you. It's not a reliable ability. In other words, that will always be up, if that makes sense. Okay, and it does have a cooldown on it too. So, but basic rotation would be basically, you go in, you Relentless Strike, you try to get your kinetic energy as high as possible, and get it up there to the point where it's almost maxed. And the reason we do this is we'll talk about it a little bit later in amps. You have an amp called Radiate, which does like a dot damage, right? Well, once you get your relentless strikes and your kinetic energy up high enough, you want to go ahead and get Rampage on cooldown as quickly as possible. Uh, you also want to get your breaching strikes on cooldown as quickly as possible. Uh, and the reason for this is hopefully your kinetic energy stays at max, your radiate's still ticking, you pop your onslaught innate, and it keeps ticking for the duration because onslaught, like I stated earlier, keeps your kinetic energy at a steady. Um, it basically keeps it where it won't decay, right? And it also resets your cooldowns. So not only are you ticking radiate damage on these folks, um, but you're also able to go back into rampage. You're also able to use your breaching strikes again. Um, it gives you a lot of damage in a big burst. One thing that you do want to note is that, and Abu will agree with me on this, is he pulls threat a lot. Um, so you kind of have to be careful when using your abilities because, if you pull threat and die, well, then you're not damaging anymore or doing DPS anymore. So, you kind of have to have threat meter up, kind of need to judge for yourself where you're at on that threat meter and whether or not, it's worth throwing out all that damage if you're going to pull threat, if that makes sense. A couple other pointers, like I talked about, cleave is very important. Cleaving multiple mobs is very important to your DPS. Um, so getting yourself in a position to where you can hit multiple targets is always going to be an increase in DPS. Okay. Uh, I think that basically covers. Oh, I missed one thing. If you ever need a CC break, some of the veteran dungeons need or require um, you to have a CC break. Unstoppable Force is your CC break. Okay. Uh, and in a perfect world, that's probably where we will take maybe Savage Strikes off or Bum Rush off, preferably, um, to put that ability on our bar. Okay. Uh, so anyway, that basically covers what I wanted to talk about with the abilities, ability tiers, give you a little experience there from another player's point of view, not just mine, of how to DPS with the warrior optimally. So next we're going to talk about amps. All right, I moved some points around from what Abu told me that he was currently running. But amps are, it's one of those things where once you hit 50, right, you'll have 45 amp points available to you. At this point, your priority should be to get the amp upgrade from Elder Gems and get that maxed out as quickly as possible. And the reason for this is, as you'll see as we go through here, there's a lot of things that we're missing, right? Like, more critical hit chance, critical hit severity. I'll talk about another amp a little bit later that we don't have right now that would work really well and probably increase your DPS a little bit, So getting those amp points as close as you can to max is going to be your first priority as the DPS warrior. Second priority would be, of course, getting your ability points to do more damage because you can obviously access more abilities in tiers. So, again, just some FYI. So anyway, let's talk about the assault tree. Obviously, we want to go with assault power increases first and foremost. Because, like I stated earlier in my stat priorities, assault power is the best stat for increasing your damage, okay? Um, we took critical hit because in our stat priority it's second. So again, it's one of those things where you don't have strike through available in your amps. Otherwise, that would be a nice one to put amp points in, but it's not here. Alright, so radiate. When you reach a maximum kinetic energy, this is what I was talking about earlier, you deal 21.6% technology damage to all foes within 8 meters every 2 seconds for 6 seconds. Um, so it's basically like a dot. When you max out your kinetic energy, you have this sort of dot that's going around you. And then anyone in that 8 meter range gets hit by that dot. So you can see, like I was talking about earlier, where this would do some pretty good damage for you, especially with that idea of popping onslaught at max kinetic energy, so it doesn't go back down. So, all right, laceration. Again, it's a decent amp, but it's sort of weak. I'll be honest, it's sort of weak in the amount of damage that it does for the amount of points you have to invest in it. So I would kind of shy away from doing or picking up this amp. But yeah, basically landing a hit while above 250 kinetic energy has a 10% chance to deal 14.8 physical damage every 2 seconds for 8 seconds. That's basically what the amp does. Alright, now this one is a big one. Detonate. Basically using your overdrive, which is, the onslaught stance innate overdrive. Deals 225 technology damage to 10 foes within 10 meters. Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that. I needed to get a drink. So basically, this is like the biggest, best amp, really and truly, because it gives you tons of burst damage whenever you pop that in 8. So pretty nice, pretty self-explanatory in what it's saying. Power hitter. Letting a critical hit grants some power for 10 seconds. Empower increases your crit hit severity by 7.5%. Can stack up to 5 times. So it's a shit ton of critical hit severity, which is also another reason why critical hit is our secondary stat, because when you do critical hit, crit hit severity makes those critical hits stronger. So that it's just one of those things where this is a very good amp if you're critting a lot, but it's not so good if you're not critting much, if that makes sense. Now, one amp we didn't pick up, but I believe, and Habu agrees with me as well, would be a good one to pick up, is landing a critical hit against a foe below 15% health. Deals an additional 120.88% physical damage. So again, in those situations where you're fighting a boss, he's below 15% health, you guys are trying to truck through him, trying to get him down, this is one of those amps that'll help you get that job done quicker. So again, it's not bad, and I wouldn't say it's a I wouldn't say it's a mandatory amp. The really mandatory amps would be these 3, really, in tier 2. But again, it's a DPS increase, so once we get the amp points, throw it in there. I would say. Kinetic Fury. While above 500 kinetic energy, grant and Empower. Empower increases damage dealt by 7.2%. While above 750 kinetic energy, the damage is increased by 9%. So again, it's catch 22. We're already going to try to keep our kinetic energy up that high, so why not take it and get the increased damage that it gives us. So Trimmer, not very good ability in my opinion. It's more or less like a PvP ability, to be honest. So I don't take it, since this is a PvE oriented build. Okay. Next, Armor Shred. Landing a direct hit grants a 50% chance to apply an expose for 15 seconds. Can only occur every 20 seconds. Reduces all resistances by 8.6%. So again, this is a way to increase our damage as well as the group's damage to the target. So why not take it? So that covers the assault tree. Let's talk a little bit about, well, there is strike through. I apologize, guys. I'm sorry. I'm a little tired trying to do this video, but I wanted to get the content out to you. So of course we take strike through 1, 2, and 3 to give us that 3% strike through, and so that we can itemize other stats with higher priority. Okay. Again, you want your strike through right around 8% if you can help it. If you can get there, it's perfect. If you're a little bit low, don't lose no sleep about it. But it just helps your damage a little better. So obviously we take those amps. Cooldowns, we took cooldown reduction. Couple amps down here that are pretty cool. You can no longer be dazed, unyielding. It's pretty nice when you're able to sprint and not get dazed and slowed by a boss mechanic or what have you. So you can get to a place quicker. It's just all around. It's going to increase your DPS in the long run if you think about it just for a second. Anyone who's played Warrior, you have to be in melee damage or melee range to do damage. So the quicker you can get there, the better chances you can get damage out. So kind of goes without saying. It's a pretty nice amp. Speed bursts. Again, I would say that this goes good with unyielding as well, for the same reasons as I stated for unyielding. Basically what it does is every time you dash, it grants a swiftness, which increases your movement speed by 10%. Can stack up to 2 times, so yeah, 2 dodges, 20% increase to movement speed. Yeah, that's pretty nice. You're going to be going places with that. Another amp that we didn't take, but me and Hambu were kind of talking about it earlier. It would not be a bad amp to consider, because what it does is it builds 45 kinetic energy every 0.25 seconds while sprinting in combat. Okay, so if you think about that for a little while, you can get your energy up there, kinetic energy up there quicker when you're sprinting anyway, to try to get back in melee range, to get out of telegraphs. So it's not a bad amp either. And certainly we're giving you options here. So not trying to go straight cookie cutter on you. And lastly, we take Power Link because, as I stated in my abilities preview, overview, it's an increase in DPS for you and for the group members who receive it. So alright, one last amp I will talk about. It's really situational. Would be Kinetic Burst would be an option for some of you guys out there. Your attacks build kinetic energy. But what it does is it gives you a proc ability to give you more kinetic energy, an additional 200 kinetic energy. The problem with this is the cooldown 1, and it's a proc ability 2. So there's a pro and con to it. Obviously, if you're getting a lot of procs, then it's going to be good for you. But if you're not, well, it just sucks. So, alright, so that basically covers the amps and what I wanted to talk about there, and the build in a nutshell, to be honest. Yeah, guys, I want to thank all you guys out there that are continuing to watch my videos. Big thank you from me. It really helps me to see that you guys really care by your comments, by your views, by your likes and dislikes. I always want to say this, that I can learn something from you guys as much as I'm trying to you know teach you guys this stuff. Uh, so I don't know everything, and I'm more than happy to listen to constructive feedback. So please, if you're a YouTube user, drop a like or dislike, and give me a comment. What can I do better? Obviously, there's different playstyles out there, uh, and so maybe this build doesn't fit your playstyle, and that's perfectly fine. But again, keep in mind, I don't know everything about Warriors, guys. I'm simply trying to get some info out there to you. Uh, did play them during closed beta. I have a lot of friends who do play it. And I've talked to both, a lot of people about um, the DPS Warrior before I just jumped in here and started talking about stuff. So, um, again, if you're a YouTube user, subscribe. So that way you can be notified when my videos are created or made. Um, if you're a Twitch user out there and you're watching this, follow me on Twitch. Username's BigDogLB. That way, again, you can be alerted to when my videos go live. And check them out. You know what I mean? Uh, Again, this is Luke from Guild Action Team Broforce, signing off. You guys have a great night. We'll see you next time. Maybe dive into something new. It's a secret, so stay tuned. Stay tuned. Alright, guys, I'm out. Have a good night.